Kevin.
Let's give it 3 more minutes.
I think you're right.
Uh, yes, we don't want to wait too long because we have a fairly long agenda.
Oh, here we go. We're doing much better.
I think we will get going now, if that's okay with everybody. Um, I want to welcome everyone at the meeting to the May Zoning and Development Committee meeting. I'll start the meeting in a few minutes, but we all need Kevin Wu's instructions on how to participate. So Kevin, go ahead.
Okay, hi everyone. Let me just, sorry, let me just find them. Okay, hi everyone, welcome. If this is your first time joining us virtually, you will notice that you're currently muted and everyone will remain muted throughout the meeting, except for the committee co-chairs, Anthony and Elizabeth. As we move through the agenda, the co-chairs will call on members of the public wishing to speak. You can participate by going to your React icon on your device and pressing the raise hand button, not the wave or thumbs up, as those will disappear. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you are calling in on the phone, it is *9 to raise hand and *6 to unmute. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. The chat is available for technical support only to help with Zoom software problems, not to ask questions of the co-chairs. They will not see the chats. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you'll need to go to the participant section where you will find the raise hand feature there. Please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we may not be able to see you. Chat me, I'm here for support. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. This evening, we're going to be discussing City of Yes housing opportunities. The Department of City Planning has a questionnaire that it is sent out, and we have discussed this before. We had a long meeting and in March, and we came up with a list of our objections there. I'll read them just to remind people. But what we're providing you with is the information and reminders so that we can get through these 15-question questionnaire at the end. And just to remind people of the positions we took in March when we last held big meeting on this particular subject. I'll read the objections. There are 13. I just read them one by one, sorry. 1, building heights above 210 feet cause environmental damage and should not be permitted. 2, the sliver law was enacted in outraged response to the early examples of these buildings. Residents felt that their neighborhoods were being destroyed, and there was no opposition to the law. It must be retained. 3, the proposal to extend the allowable distance for the transfer of development rights will result in even taller buildings that will damage the environment, the character of neighborhoods, and the quality of life of residents. 4, New York City is a city of neighborhoods. The proposal is too large in scope to deal with this fact and to protect the city's essential character. 5, many areas do not have the supportive infrastructure and sufficient local services to support the proposed increase in population density. 6, there is no need to increase the size of buildings to comply with ADA requirements. 7, we do not believe that the proposal will encourage the development of affordable housing. 8, the city itself should build affordable housing. 9, the proposal would destroy the character of areas zoned for 1 or 2 family houses. 10, parking requirements are needed to reduce traffic. They are particularly needed in areas close to the congestion pricing zone. 11, Community District 8M, that's us, is the most densely populated district in the most densely populated city in the United States. Increasing that density would be inappropriate. Greater diversity, 12, greater diversity in apartment sizes is needed, not a decrease in the minimum apartment size. 3, if more buildings are built, much more green space will be needed. So that's what we came to the conclusion in March. And now I will hand you over to Anthony, who's going to provide information on the proposal and give a zoning lesson in the zoning proposal in this thing. Thank you very much. Hello, Zona. Hello.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. And I'd like to first thank Sharon Pope Marshall, who has left us as a co-chair, but is still, I believe, a member of the committee, although not here yet tonight. We will miss you as co-chair and only expect her to speak even more freely as a committee member. So we're sorry she's gone, but we will soldier on. Let me start by, well, hang on a second. Elizabeth, you are, I believe, jumping the gun. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Interrupt.
Thanks, Anthony. Sorry, I just, in listening to the summary that Elizabeth Ashby just read, I was a little bit struck by the fact that it seemed to be all of the objections that were discussed. There were also a lot of very positive comments.
No, yes, absolutely. Go ahead. Sorry.
And so I think there was more to the discussion, and there were some very positive things about aspects of City of Yes that were discussed and said in the meeting. And so I'd love for, if we are reading out and sharing from this committee to the larger board, that we ensure that we have the full balance.
We will. We're not.
yeah,
Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah, sorry. This list at the committee, the committee wanted a letter written expressing their concerns, and this list is the concerns that they expressed.
Okay. And I do think there's some very positive things about this proposal. that
Yes.
Even in this committee, we discussed, and so even if we're sending a list of concerns, we should be certain to also reinforce where we have praise. It's generally a good strategy.
Yes, we are going.
Thank
to
you.
do that.
I will now stop.
Allow yourself to be muted.
Thank you.
Ah,
Yes.
Okay. Just as I wrestle with the notion of being able to now I can share. Okay. So we're going to come up to this and we're going to share, and hopefully this is going to work. I am always more than a little bit worried, but it appears as though it has. Okay. Can you see my screen? Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth Rose. Okay, good evening. Last week, we saw a presentation from City Planning on the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. As a full board, we will be voting on the proposals next month. So it seemed like an opportune time to review the proposal and look at the worksheet from City Planning that was embedded on their website and was part of the materials available to you all. Our goal tonight is to be able to offer our collective wisdom, positive as well as negative, to the full board. And the idea is to at least offer a sense of the committee on using that worksheet as our kind of guide. There will be a series of polls, and when we get to that, Kevin will hopefully explain how it works, unless it's not totally self-explanatory. I only recall using it once, and I'll tell you the honest truth, I don't remember. But so we're going to start here. Let's see. Did that work? No. Hang on. There we are. I have to move something here that's there. We go. Perfect. Okay, you must be all extremely tired of having seen these maps. This is the fourth time through for them. But basically, this is just a reminder that we have at present on the Upper East Side in Community District 8, extremely but not the most complicated zoning and a great mix of uses. First, we're going to talk briefly about zoning lot mergers and transfer of development rights. Zoning lot mergers are unaffected by the City of Yes for Housing, I think. But transfer of development rights are. The little diagram here, which is very good, came from somewhere on the city planning website. And the point is that in the hypothetical example at left, the owner of zoning lot B would like to build a larger building than his zoning allows. Zoning lot B is this guy here. Fortunately, the owner of zoning lot A has unused floor area. You can see there they are, and would like to profit from the unused development rights. This is a description directly from city planning. The owners merge their lots, although they retain different separate ownership. I've never quite understood how that works. I'm sure Adam can explain it, thereby sharing the total area allowable for both sites. The unused floor area on lot B is then dumped on top of the building on lot A, making it larger. Now, in practice, once again, an illustrative example from the most important block in the city, my block of 77th Street. These diagrams do not take into account setback regulations on the avenue, which could result in an even taller building on the corner. All right, this is your existing condition. You have a vacant lot. This is potentially the unused development rights for all of the lots on that block front. If an as-of-right building here in the lower left is built on the corner, it will be about this big. That is FAR 10. If all of the floor area available from these guys is through zoning lot merger is dumped on this guy, it gets to be this much bigger. So part of the reason that we have disproportionately tall buildings next to not so tall buildings is because of the ability to essentially buy unused development rights from your neighbors extending down the street. Now, under the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, there is a detail having to do with the transfer of development rights, and there are a number of things to look at. This on the left is our community district, with the exception of both the north and south ends of Roosevelt Island, showing our individual landmarks in kind of magenta, and our historic districts in that sort of funny, not quite orange. The City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, pardon my dyslexia, would loosen restrictions on the ability of designated landmarks to transfer unused development rights to zoning lots in the immediate vicinity. Currently, the program allows for a landmark, and this came actually out of the presentation the other night, allows for this landmark corner building to transfer its unused floor area to these lots that are either adjacent, behind, next to, across the street, or diagonally across the street. The proposal would extend that the entire block it's on, plus the entire block facing in both directions and across both streets. So it would increase the area from to which this landmark could offer its unused development rights. Okay? And there are more details of it, but an example. This is Marymount, and this is the Richard Henry Dana House, which is an individual landmark. They have, this building has, and this is based on stuff, none of these numbers are exact, they're close enough though for the conversation. The floor area allowed in this neighborhood is 4.0, it's an R8B zone. If we add the housing, affordable housing bonus of 20%, it's 3,400 square feet. Because it is close enough for a transit improvement, it would qualify for a transit improvement bonus of yet another 20%. And that would provide a total allowable floor area of 28, not quite 24,000 square feet. If the existing floor area of the building is subtracted from that, there are 11,300 square feet of development rights available to transfer. Well, if they transfer it, as this green arrow shows, to the corner, to 1349 2nd Avenue, which is currently, I think, a 4-story building, something like that, 5-story building. Its floor area is 10, it's on the avenue. Its bonus gives it another 9,800 square feet, and it's even closer to the subway. And it gets another 9,800 square feet for that. And that provides an FAR of 14. And then if you add the landmark, the 11,300 square feet from our not neighboring, but nearish landmark, you would then have a building of 80,000 square feet, or in fact, a building with an FAR of 16.3. This is just one example that frankly was easy for me to do the arithmetic on. Obviously, if a number of buildings, individual landmarks could in fact multiply their effect onto our eastern avenues. By the way, that would provide, with the existing floor area of 22,000 square feet, at 70,000 square feet, this might not be an attractive offer. For somebody at 80,000 square feet, it might be. But anyway, that's a kind of effect of that little piece of City of Yes for housing opportunity. Now, one of the other things that was, I think, apparent in the one of the other things that was apparent in the presentation that was easy to miss was the effect on special districts of some slight modifications to the special district regulations. So it would allow sites within the special districts to participate in that universal affordability preference, which would allow an FAR increase of 20% and a higher maximum building height than R10A. It is a little unclear as to exactly how this will work. Frankly, I've not read the proposed zoning text. But the point is that these special districts, both Madison Avenue and Park Avenue, and could be significantly altered as a consequence of this. All right, there were a number of suppositions, facts that had to do that explained the origins of our severe housing shortage, and it seemed only fair to take a look at what those facts implied. So the apartment vacancy rate is 1.41% in the city and 2.33% in Manhattan, which is kind of interesting. One of the arguments that they made was that the construction of housing stock, and we'll see in a minute where they've made that, the construction of housing stock has not kept pace with the population increase. The population increase is this green line I'm tracing now, and the construction of housing, and this goes back to the mid-60s, the availability of housing units, not construction, availability of housing units has in fact largely kept pace with it. New York City is not, this came from the presentation the other night. New York City is not building enough housing to meet New Yorkers' needs, okay? And they say that we're creating much less housing than we used to, and they pointed to the 1920s as a period of great housing construction and boom. And part of that construction boom had to do with the instituting of the 1916 zoning resolution and later resolutions which allowed for greater density in a lot of Manhattan and even in the outer boroughs during the 20s. That's where that bulge comes from. The bulge comes in part from the fact that not very much new housing was built in the period between, let's say, 1900 and 1920. But if we look at, let's see, the housing, they say at the same time, average household size is declining. So we need more homes to house people. Well, persons per household. In 1960, there were 2.88 people per household. Now there are 2.55. That's true. But, smaller rather. If we look at, let's say, 2000 or even 1990, over the course of the last 30 years, even 40 years, the size of households has in fact grown ever so slightly. I'm sorry, misleading there. Which is to say it's remained fairly flat. So it's not as though households are smaller and we need more apartments. Households are more or less the same size they always were, but we still need more apartments. That's not true. It's not true that it isn't. Total housing stock has kept pace with population since really between 1965 and today. It's more or less the same. One of the statements that the people from city planning made the other night was that the vacancy rate, which is 2% plus or minus, was 10% in 2021. And if we all think all the way back to 2021, there is a good reason why the vacancy rate was so high in 2021. People left the city because of COVID. New York, new housing is concentrated in just a few neighborhoods. Now, I don't believe they intended for this to be the message. But if you look, the areas that have the sort of smallest number of new housing units are, us, and then the kind of single family house districts in Brooklyn and Queens, and of course, Staten Island. I don't think we are the intended targets of that, but if we look at another way of looking at this chart, which is housing density by community board, the darker the blue, the denser the population. And if we look at a kind of comparison, the city average, it's very small print, I apologize, 13,300 units per square mile is a citywide average. And if we look at these, the yellow are more or less at city average. The pink, slightly less. The red, very much less than the city average of housing density. Not surprising given that Staten Island and these areas of Brooklyn and Queens are the only areas really with single family houses. And finally, I turned it into a bar graph at last. This is population density of various cities. And I'm just showing, and there are varying sizes and populations. There are 16 million people in Lagos, but Lagos is huge, twice the size of New York City, which is why its population density is pretty similar. But when you go down the list, the thing that I just like to point out is, first of all, New York City has a total density of 31,000 people per square mile. Manhattan is at not quite 76,000 people per square mile. And of course, Community District 8, 117,000 people in each of our 2 square miles. It's just a kind of reminder that we are asked to do our part, but it looks as though we've already given a lot. So I went fast. we'll we can take some comments. We're really trying hard to get through this quickly. What we plan on doing is answering each of these on the next one. I think there are three of them, 3 sheets. The next 3 sheets, oops, cheating. The next 3 sheets are, in fact, on the left-hand side, the worksheet from city planning. On the right is additional information on each of those, each of the proposals, breaking them down a little bit more. And so what we're going to try and do is, there are some where I don't think there needs to be much discussion. We've talked about all of these a lot already. And we would ask that we try and keep our comments brief and not and unique. That's a good way of saying it. But first, if people have general comments that would be useful, or that they think would be useful, I guess. Why don't we start there and try and let's impose a 2-minute time limit on ourselves, so that we can keep this moving. Okay. All right. I'll keep sharing. We can leave this up.
Anthony, do you want me to put up the 2-minute timer, or do you want folks?
Yeah, why? Yeah, I mean, I kind of hate to do it, but I think we probably should.
Okay.
I'm having trouble finding my mouse. There it is. Or actually, I'm going to stop sharing and then we'll start sharing again. It appears I am frozen. No, you guys. No, I'm not. I'm somewhat frozen now. Can you all hear me? A nod?
We can
No.
hear you.
All right. Well, but I'm trying to get out of this. Yeah, this is bad. Sorry. Something's happening. I apologize.
Anthony, I think your audio is coming in fine, but the image in your camera.
Yes,
Very
yes,
slow.
exactly. I'm trying desperately to get out of the share, which should help.
So we took off the screen share.
Oh, you did?
I did.
All right, so let me
You want
try.
me to put it back up?
No. It says I'm still sharing, but that's okay with me. I can't get, my mouse is just. Ah, there we go. Something's happening. All right. I may disappear, in which case I'll come right back. Okay. I think we're okay now. All right. Get rid of that. Raised hands first from non-committee members. Okay. Dylan.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
I just want to first thank you very much for your presentation. But I did want to bring up a few things that I thought might add additional context. So you made points, or at least in the presentation, there were points about how population and housing have kind of kept roughly the same pace, and that household size in recent decades has actually increased. I think those are both very good points, but I think added on to those is the context of, if there's only so much housing, that's likely only going to support so much population. And I believe in that time frame, we've seen a much greater growth of jobs. And so there are a lot of people who want to live in the city, but because housing is constrained, there aren't as many people who want to move in there. So the population growth is also kind of an effect of the amount of housing we've been building. And I think a similar thing is happening with household size. I don't know the stats for New York City, but I know, generally speaking, a lot of families have fewer and fewer kids. So that's a big component of household size. But if there are lots of young adults trying to move in to a fixed number of apartments, that might lead to more and more adults living with roommates. Now, that's not the end of the world. I did that. It was actually a lot of fun. But that is still potentially an indicator of supply constraints. And so I do think that is just some added context on both of those. And then the last point I wanted to make was that when I was listening to the complaints, it sounded like we were complaining about building more housing in low density neighborhoods, that it would upset the character. And then we also complained about building more housing in very dense neighborhoods like ours. Personally, I love the density of this neighborhood. That's part of why I'm here. And I think it's part of the character of Community Board 8 and part of the character of Manhattan to have tall buildings and lots of density. And I really appreciate being able to just walk a few blocks here and there to various pizza shops, bodegas, various friends. And so personally, I'm in support of the City of Yes for Housing. And I would urge the committee and the rest of the board, though I already heard the list of complaints, to at least focus on the successes and the opportunities and the things we like about the City of Yes, and not spend as much time as we go through the questionnaire focusing on our complaints, because I think housing is not just a burden for us to deal with, but it's an opportunity for us to have more people who are going to frequent our favorite businesses, more friends, just more opportunities. And so I'm strongly in support of more housing in our neighborhood. And I thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you. This is not actually necessarily a reflection on you, Dylan, but I think we are going to institute a timer we can all watch as we speak. Otherwise, we will never get out of here.
Does everyone
Okay.
see the timer on the screen?
Yeah, if you could. Oh, there it is. I see it. It's small. Can everyone see it? It's on Kevin's head.
Oh, I don't know how to get it out. Pop out.
There it is. It's next to Kevin's head. So you have to find Kevin. All right. Anyway, all right. Let's start it over for Andrew Fine. I think that was, yeah.
Andrew.
Great.
Thanks, Cos. Yeah, I just a couple of points. One is that I appreciate that there are a lot of people on this call and that we want to move along. But at the same time, I think that we really have to take into account that this is the largest wholesale demolishment of community input and zoning that we've ever seen.
Yes.
In one fell swoop. So I know there's a timer, and I'll not use all 2 minutes, but I do think this is a very, very, very important issue that deserves all the time that we could possibly give to it in terms of community input. For those of us that are over 40 years old, I want to tell those that are under 40 years old that we've been on this playbook before. We have built so much housing on the Upper East Side, probably more than any other neighborhood. And guess what? It's like 421A. It's empty glass boxes. it's $3 million 2 bedrooms. This is not contributing to the housing stock of New York City. And at the end of the day, we're just going to end up with more of the same and more people priced out. And this is not a productive use of our zoning leverage. So all I can say is, if we're say no to the city of yes, and give us a real serious consideration. Listen to the facts. Let's not fall into this trap again, because this is really the developers using the YIMBYs, youngsters, to their advantage to basically ply their trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Dean Christakos. I think you were next, Dean.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah, you were.
well, thank you. I will be brief and make sure to give other people a chance. I want to say I love that graph of the building, of the amount of construction in 1920, because that's when my grandmother and grandfather came here as kids and, you know, didn't have a lot of money in their families, but they still lived in Manhattan until they moved out to Queens. And I just love seeing that moment. I have a quick question you can answer later, is when or where we do that worksheet. I just want to make a comment about something you had said about the transfer of rights for development rights for landmarks and how that's being expanded. I think that's fantastic. Some things do get landmarked and should be landmarked. And, you know, that represents a loss in a way. Like, those can't be redeveloped because we want to preserve them. And I think it's great to be able to use that loss and reuse it elsewhere. I am well into my 40s. Unfortunately, I miss being young. But, you know, the thing is, you mentioned about, somebody had mentioned about the additional construction in the Upper East Side. You know, the thing is, all right, we don't live in the most affordable places in the world. But, you know, if you go out to those places on First Avenue in York, where they've built a lot of those towers, those are a lot more affordable. And that gives people a chance to live in the Upper East Side. And, you know, I think that has sort of worked out, and I'd like to see more of that. So that's all I have to say. I've got 30 seconds, so saved everyone some time.
Thank you. I think those of us who live in what was described by one of my employers as the Far East think our rents are too high too. So I suppose it is all relative. Anyway, it looks as though we now have committee members. Michelle.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you for the charts and the information. One of my main issues with the whole program is that there has been no effort to address the ultimate cause of homelessness. And so that number is going to continue to increase for many, many, many reasons. And this program or any other will just be trying to play catch up in order to address it. So that's a very big concern. The other thing that I would like to address, we may have to stop the clock for a discussion about this, but the big fallacy that I see, and as you made the presentation, is that in new construction, you are able to take advantage of two bonuses. That's like when a store has something on sale and they also have a promotion. You can only take advantage of one of those. Here, your chart showed us that you can get the transportation bonus. You can also get the other bonus. I think that we should ask the city to address the issue of only being able to use one bonus. And that is nowhere in the program. So that's one thing. And I realize that's going to require some discussion. The other thing is a question. Are you using the terms special district and historic districts interchangeably?
No.
Okay, because you referred to Madison and Park as special districts. In fact, they are historic districts.
No, they're special
No,
districts.
no.
The Park Avenue Historic District was declared from 79th to 86th Street in 2014. And the Park Avenue Historic District, starting from 62nd or 3rd Street, was sometime in the 80s. Now, there is a Park Avenue Special District that is just on the corner of Park Avenue and 86th Street. However, Park Avenue, up until around 92nd Street, and then there's a break, is a historic district. And it's either called the Park Avenue Historic District, or it's part of the Historic District of the Upper East Side. It is not called a special district.
Michelle, actually, there is the Special Park Improvement District. Now, there are also the Upper East Side Historic District and the Carnegie Hill and the Carnegie Hill Expanded Historic District, which are what I think you're alluding to. But in fact, there is a Special Park Avenue Improvement District, and there is a special Madison Avenue district, which is not a historic district. It is
the Park Avenue Improvement District, and Elizabeth can answer this, is only encompasses certain blocks. It does not refer to the whole stretch of Park Avenue.
The park it's called the Special Park Improvement District. It covers 5th and Park, and it originally its purpose was to raise funds for the city. You got a bonus in it. This was before I even lived here. But it was to improve parks. Didn't work. Apparently the money didn't go anyway, but it remained an historic a special zoning district,
right.
Both of it, plus the wide sides, crosstown streets between usually about 5th and Park are in this special.
The crosstown streets. But what blocks are these? Because when I filed the RFE to get the historic district on Park from 79th to 86, and I have the paperwork that calls it the Park Avenue Historic District. So
yes.
I think
Michelle,
the side street, yeah.
No, you are both correct. There are two things happening at once, simultaneously. There is a landmark historic district that encompasses, or there are districts, landmark historic districts that encompass portions of Park Avenue, and they overlap this underlying Park Avenue Special Improvement District.
So for the purposes of our discussion, are you claiming that it doesn't matter because you're using those interchangeably anyway?
No, I am not using them interchangeably. Those portions of Park Avenue which are not landmark districts are subject to the alterations to the rules on special districts. And the same is true on Madison, large portions of which are not part of a historic district.
Can I clarify one thing, Anthony, because I'm not understanding something? Under what you had explained, air rights or development rights can be transferred from landmark districts.
Landmark buildings,
and which are no longer, that transfer is no longer required to be contiguous as it used to be.
correct.
And now it can jump an avenue or whatever.
Well, a full block, actually.
Or a full block. But if it jumps that full block to something like Park Avenue, which is a historic district, your statement was that it could affect that. Well, why doesn't the historic district
No, I did not. No.
Oh, then I misunderstood. Can you
Yes.
please just clarify? I'm not getting that.
Sure. The idea is that you can transfer from an individual landmark to a greater distance away, as much as, let's say, 600 feet, depending
Right.
on your block, plus across the street to the next block. And maybe it's about 400 feet on average. You can't do that to a landmark site as the receiving site, or you can't do it to a landmark, a site in a landmark district without the approval of the Landmarks Commission.
All right, when you talk about, for example, an avenue like Park Avenue, where there basically is a 210 height limit.
No, what I
And-
was saying about that is that in those portions of Park Avenue, which are governed by the Special Park Improvement District, not the historic district, the height limit and the bulk of the building can be larger. A new building can be larger through the introduction of the 20% affordable housing bonus.
But what about when the historic district and the special improvement district overlap and encompass the same streets?
If landmarks approve, let's say, look, I apologize to everyone, and we'll. If one of the less architecturally attractive structures on Park Avenue that is within the historic district, okay, but is not itself a contributing building to that district, it's just
Oh, that's
there.
different, yeah.
If Landmarks approves its demolition, the new building can have not a height of 210, but a height of whatever the new what would be ignoring height limit for a moment. Instead of an FAR of 10, it would be able to have an FAR of 12. So
All right.
it could be 20% bigger.
All right, I'll sum up so I won't continue this, but let me just say this. Now you introduced, and this can be for further conversation, we don't have to say it now, because you introduced the word now contributing building. Now that is a different designation, so I don't want to get into that, but that's it's a different issue now to introduce that. But what I have a lot to say on this issue, but I'm over time. So let me just say this. What I would like this committee to consider and address is the fallacy, in my mind, it's a fallacy of a site being able to take advantage of two bonuses in order to get height. I don't think that's anywhere in the city of Yes. I don't think it's not offered. I mean, it's mentioned because it allows you to take those bonuses. I'm saying that we should discuss that. And one of our recommendations may end up being that we don't want you to be able to take two such bonuses. So I would like us as a committee to have a discussion about that.
Okay,
I may
thank you.
raise my hand again later, but I'm finished. Thank you very much.
Okay, Rita.
I don't get involved with all the numbers. I'm too old and numbers don't matter. What does matter here is that this is a presentation that we should approve, or if we don't approve, we are against affordable housing. What I would like us to be able to do is to employ or put down certain rules and regulations. This is like a Wild West thing. I mean, we'll end up with buildings. I notice all the buildings are on the avenues that get all these bonuses, but you and I both know that's also going to hit the mid-block.
Mhm.
I see no caps. I see absolutely a free-for-all for developers. And that I think that this is something, there are not enough concrete numbers as to heights of buildings. I don't know what the FAR is, whatever, but the height of the building matters. Are we going to end up with 80-story building in the middle of a block? That's what I'm afraid of. And also, we're going to lose our communities. I think this is ripe for Chinatown, NoHo, Soho, Lower East Side, everything that makes New York, New York. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Next, we have Alita and then Elizabeth Rose.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to talk fast. This deals nothing with buildings that construct fewer houses than the buildings they demolish. And I think that ought to be a part of it because it's not just with us, it's in other areas as well. Other areas will have voluntary additional housing. No one is going to force someone to build a unit in their basement or an accessory dwelling unit in their backyard. But what we are going to see is an influx of involuntarily accepted new housing and new construction by developers, because that's just what happens. Third of all, these buildings are not in a vacuum. We don't live, well, we do live on an island, but the buildings themselves are not islands, and they have ancillary and maybe unintended consequences on the prices of everything around them. The ability of health clinics to stay in place, the ability of not-for-profits to have a home. And just because someone might be able to afford an apartment, if they don't want to spend $8 on a cup of cappuccino, how are they, or $3 on a container of yogurt in the supermarket, how are they going to live in a place? We need to understand the impact of this kind of construction on other aspects of life. There should be a requirement for small businesses in the lobbies, in the street levels of these new developments, because we're losing it. And as Rita says, we're losing community as well. And I would say a big sharp no to anything that diminishes community review or environmental review anywhere in this way too much proposal. And then I have a question for you. Does the increase in FAR match the number or the space of affordable units, so that if they get a 20% increase in building height because they're putting in affordability, does that mean that all of that extra space will be taken up by affordable housing? Because if that's true, then why would they put anything like that in there? And if it's not true, how much of the units and how much of the space is going to be affordable? And is affordability a question of floor area? I mean, actual square footage, or a question of the number of units? And we've seen people try and take advantage of this all day long. So those are my points. I tried to fit it in. Thank you.
You did very well, fitting it in. If you build beyond the build that extra 20%, that 20% goes to affordable housing, and that is 20% of floor area.
So then why would anybody do that if they don't, they're not getting.
Alita, I think the answer to that, and Adam might know, but I think that the answer to that, I certainly don't know. I am not a real estate developer, but I have no understanding of why somebody would or wouldn't want to do that. But I see Adam has raised his hand, so I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I'm going to let Adam jump the line. Adam, please.
I mean, there are any number of reasons, but the primary reason is that now that 485X, which is the tax abatement program, has been passed by the state, you are required to develop at least 20% on-site affordable in order to qualify for that abatement. So if the 20% and the 20% are gonna lead to the development of rental housing, and which would be 20% affordable.
Sorry, Adam.
No, that's okay.
So they're just getting bonuses all the way around. They're getting tax benefits that last for a very long time because we keep seeing people buying or renting high-priced apartments and not having to pay any real estate taxes whatsoever, even though they can afford it. And then they're also getting this bonus so that they'll be able to have even more units and go higher. So the affordable units could be on floors 2, 3, and 4, and the high expensive units could be on floors 80, 90, and 100.
Well,
So
Go ahead.
the city has requirements about distribution of affordable units, so that doesn't happen. Secondly, it's a chicken or the egg, right? I'm not gonna build an affordable development without a tax abatement. And I'm not gonna seek those additional density bonuses without knowing that I'm gonna get a tax abatement. So it's, you know, which one comes first?
well, maybe that's why the city and the state should be building their own, because the taxpayers are footing the bill anyway. But enough, I've said enough. So thank you. And thank you for raising your hand, Adam.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you, Alita. All right, now Elizabeth Rose.
Thank you all, and I'm always happy to defer to Adam. I would like to suggest that we need clarification from the Department of City Planning on something very specific before the board votes next month. And that is the clause or the section of City of Yes for Housing Opportunity that specifically speaks to the removal of height limits in special districts. I think that is an area of lack of transparency. Clearly, nobody on this call is totally clear on where the height limits in those special districts are enumerated. Is it just because of the zoning, or is it because of the special district? And I think for this community district, we need to know exactly what that aspect of the proposal will mean for our special districts, because we obviously have all of Fifth, all of Madison. Well, I'm not going to say all, most of Fifth, most of Madison, most of Park covered by these special districts. And we think of those blocks as all having height limits. And I don't think any of us understand the interplay between what City of Yes is proposing as it relates to special districts and height limits and the reality of our community board area. And I think that is a point of information that they should be able to give us clarity on before the next meeting.
Well, I'd like just to pipe in for a minute here. Special districts usually, and this applies to Madison Avenue, and they'll have they being in R10, which has no height limit zoning. However, the special district has a height limit of 210. It overrides the underlying zoning. So you've got kind of two sides of the coin there.
So if you are correct, Elizabeth, that it is the special district that has the 210 height limit, that
correct.
means, and the height limit will be removed from special districts. That means there will no longer be a 210 height limit on Fifth, Madison, or
That's
Park.
what I presume.
Yes,
Okay.
I think that's a good question. And as we lurch through this evening,
And I think we also think that 210 height limit applies to Lexington Avenue as well.
No,
but
it's
No,
lower on
it's
Lexington,
not a
180,
special district.
185.
It's
180.
lower. It's R9X because it's a narrower.
Okay. So on Lexington, you're saying that the height limit exists within the zone.
Yes,
but on
it's
Fifth, Madison,
contextually
Park,
zoned
it
R9X.
exists in the special district. So effectively, what we're hearing is Fifth, Madison, and Park will no longer have a height limit, period.
Perhaps.
My guess.
We will get clarification on that point. And I think if others have sort of specific questions we might address to city planning, it would be very useful, since we actually have a smidgen of time before we have to vote on this as a full board.
Yep.
Okay,
you.
Michelle, I'm going to skip you for a second, and we're going to go to Sebastian Hallam Clark. Welcome.
Well, there we go. Hi, everyone. I'm Sebastian. I'm a newly appointed member of the community board, and I'm really excited to get to work with all of you. I've been following along for the past few months. I typically haven't been able to attend the meetings myself, but I catch up on the YouTube replays and really appreciate all the work you've been doing. I'll say I'm really excited about what I'm seeing in the city of Yes here. I think that the biggest challenge that is facing New York is the way that rent and housing prices are just so high. We saw in the presentation last week that half of renters are rent burdened. And this is a real struggle for so many New Yorkers that prevents people from really thriving. And as we heard from city planning last week, the big challenge there that makes our housing costs so high is that housing supply is constrained. We have so many rules that make it impossible or illegal or difficult or uneconomical to build more homes for more New Yorkers. And City of Yes is not perfect, but it is an earnest attempt to try to right some of these wrongs with things like ADUs or basement apartments, or as we've been going around a bit, building taller buildings, even in places like Manhattan. And this increase in housing supply, it's not without its compromises, but it does mean that New Yorkers will have lower rents and more people will be able to thrive. One other thing that I think is often missed in these sort of discussions is the way that this means that more people can move to New York. And when someone moves to New York, they're typically moving from somewhere else in the country where they, on average, have less access to things like abortion, worse LGBT rights, and they have a lifestyle that produces more pollution. And by moving to New York, they come to a place where abortion rights are protected. People are free to be themselves, and we have one of the least polluting lifestyles in the whole country. And I think that's something really to celebrate. So I know we've got a long journey between here and getting our message back to the city, but I hope we can craft messages that do support some of these goals in City of Yes. And I'm really excited to get to work with you all on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and welcome. Just a couple of things, not actually necessarily as chairman of the co-chair of the committee, but as someone who has paid more attention to this than I wish I had. People all over the country are rent burdened everywhere. And I think that it is not a New York City problem. It is not even, I suspect, an urban problem. And that's just that's a comment. The other thing is that all too often we blame regulations on the lack of activity or the cost of activity. And we never really look hard enough or acknowledge at all that the thing that makes building in Manhattan or in New York City so expensive is, well, aside from land costs, is the cost of building. And nothing in the City of Yes for housing opportunity addresses the cost of construction, except those ancillary parts of it, which are related to permits. You can't imagine, unless you have either built or watched something being built in the country, how much easier it is to do something where you have an open site with space to store materials, that you don't have to schedule everything to the minute in order to avoid snarling traffic for days. It is calculably more expensive to build in New York City than it is to build, let's say, in Upper Westchester. It's just a fact. So that the cost of construction isn't going to come down with more housing starts in New York City. There will just be more unaffordable housing, for lack of a better way of describing it. And one other thing that I think that city planning, and then I promise I won't go on anymore. One other thing that city planning is, in fact, encouraging is a theory of trickle-down housing. If we build more housing, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's houses for the very wealthy, that's fine. They'll move into those out of their houses for the wealthy that they live in now, and then people who are living in houses for the not so wealthy will move into the houses for the wealthy instead of the houses for the super wealthy. It doesn't work that way. More housing is, yes, more housing. And Adam is right. Developers will build affordable housing, although that's FHA standards of income affordable housing and doesn't cover a lot of the people, most of the people, many of the people who live in New York City. But at any rate, I think that the notion of that if you build more housing, all of a sudden housing prices will go down is a little bit of a fantasy, because we've been living that for the last 40 years. All right, I'm sorry. I'll stop now. I think since we're going back through people, all right, we'll go back. Well, I'm thinking of the time here. All right, let's do Michelle, Andrew, Alita, and Marco very quickly, and then we'll get to our housing, whatchamacallit, our worksheet.
Okay, I think you stated it eloquently, Anthony. More building will not necessarily lead to more affordable housing. As a matter of fact, Marco on our board had done an extensive study. His hand is raised, he'll speak to it, where the more building we got and he counted the apartments, we actually lost apartments. He'll elaborate as to why and how that happened. I also want to address the cost of housing. And there's one very, very big reason why building is so costly. And it is a reason that this board supports, and that's union. We are required to have union builders. I'm not speaking for it or against it. I'm just saying that that has to be your standard for construction. Your construction costs have gone up extensively. We can basically get what we want by instituting an R10A zoning in most of the places, which is basically a 210 height limit with a 20% bonus for affordable housing. It's simple, it's clean, it can be tolerated. I am not in favor of basement apartments, as some have alluded to. If you recall, during the hurricane, half of the people living in basement apartments were drowned. This is not the safest scenario, both for flood and fire and other reasons. I'm not in favor of, as is proposed, of having apartments with shared kitchens and shared bathrooms on a floor. That takes the standard of living back to the early 1900s. It is also risky for disease. And health concerns and many other reasons. So I ask that we consider all of this while we're voting.
Okay.
But also, Anthony, I want an opportunity for us to work on that 2 bonus thing.
I understand. Okay,
Yeah.
Michelle,
Thank you. Thank you.
Andrew.
Thank you. I'd just like to know who here would love to have another 10,000 rent regulated apartments on the market tomorrow. How about 20,000 or 30,000 or 40,000 or even 80,000? Guess what? They're out there, they're being warehoused, and the idiotic housing reforms of 2020, not the only dumb idea from 2020. But the reality is that we have apartments. Before we give away our skyline to developers and we start building 50, 80, 100-story buildings on Madison and Fifth, God forbid, Third and Lex, where I live, let's free those apartments. That will have an impact on the rental market altogether. It will drive down prices because it's a very, very significant portion of the transient apartment market, and then let's go from there. I'm all for affordable housing. Give incentives where we really deliver affordable housing that's being taken away every time we knock down a 5-story building with 15 units. Marco would tell you, it's not replaced with affordable units. So that's my point. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Alida.
Thank you. I think we need to look at AMI because I listened to a program on NPR a few weeks ago with housing people, and there were a lot of people calling in that said they couldn't meet the base level AMI to get housing in New York. They were priced out, not because they made too much money, but because they made too little money. And I'm not sure where people are actually supposed to live. So for all of the concern about low-income people and people affording New York, I think the very lowest income people are being forgotten around the city. And I don't know that the city of Yes deals with that. The other thing is just a general just a general comment. There is a value to small businesses, a value to historic districts, a value to special districts. They make up the fiber of New York. They make New York distinct and unique and individual. If we eliminate them, even in the cause of housing, why it's part of the reason that people want to live in New York. There's an indefinable energy and a quality of life here all over the boroughs. They all have historic districts. They all have small businesses, some more than others, where the real estate prices are not so inflated. And they provide a sense of character. They provide a sense of neighborhood. You could be dropped down in any part of Manhattan almost, and it feels like you're inside a mall. Other boroughs don't have that. And part of it, I think, is that it's so valuable to have land, and landlords only want to rent to certain businesses, and people are busy trying to get rid of historic districts and special districts. I just think there's an intangible value to having these that makes New York really special, and would not, and I've seen work on this, would not affect the number of units to a degree strong enough or significant enough to justify their elimination or reduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Alida. Okay, Marco, and then we're going to go to the worksheet. You're unmuted, Marco.
Okay, thank you. The first thing that I had to say is nobody in common sense, we are opposed to build housing. Those people that they are very naive, they say we are thinking to oppose to build housing in general. They are wrong. They don't understand what is going on. Everybody right here is in favor to build all types of housing. You just described the transfer of the landmark buildings to the corners, but the bottom line right here is they're going against of the RAB. On the RAB, the issue is they're going to start the dancing of the air rights. The dancing of the air rights from the mid-block to the corners. Why? Because it will happen two things. Either those people, they're not going to demolish and build housing because they have no money or they are not interested to do that. And the easiest way to take money is to transfer the air right, take several million of dollars, put in the pockets, and that's it. But nobody improve those savings affordable housing. Or like it may happen, is demolish the existing affordable housing. Oh, no, I shouldn't call it affordable. Demolish the stabilized housing. That, I think, is the proper word to call. And they're gonna demolish, and they're gonna create tenant harassment. People start living. Now they're gonna start building just only a few units for low-income families and for the rich, the rest. I think this is a wrong policy. What we have to create is a policy to create opportunities for all, not for all the wealthy, just for all. And the first thing what we had to start asking, and the director of planning didn't answer my question, is we need to know what is the deficit of affordable. I don't care how many houses we has been built. We had to care what is the deficit. Don't tell me the number of people. Don't tell me the number of households. No, I need to know what is the deficit, because according with them, they said they're going to build 110,000 dwelling units in 15 years. Mayor de Blasio, he claimed that he built 140,000 units in 10 years. So basically, the city of Yes doesn't go in the right track. They're going in the wrong direction. They're going, depends on the neighborhood. And I'm going to address our neighborhood with data because it's easier to speculate. It's easy to create different rhetorics and express with themselves. The issue right here is in the Upper East Side, in the avenues, we demolish affordable housing in relation 1 to 9. So for every new affordable housing, 9 we demolish. So regardless that we can keep building, the demolition is bigger. So
Yes.
that is the major point right here. And now you mentioned that the cost of the housing is bigger, is large too. Yes, especially in the Upper East Side. So my point is, we have to concentrate with real data in our community work. We cannot talk about other communities because we don't have the data, and the infrastructure in the other neighborhoods is completely have a large deficit to develop. So the issue is not only zoning, but the infrastructure that you offer to provide that development. But to address problems on the other communities, I think is a little bit dangerous. I'm going to oppose all of them because we had to need more knowledge about the other community. It will be unfair to say yes or to say no. But I'm going to say no. It's better to say no because I have experienced that the infrastructure is very poor in that area. And my point is, if we, the Upper East Side, have the highest density in the planet, Anthony, because
Yes.
the same data that you have, I have from the community board 3, the same data, and they proves that we are the densest. And those people that said, oh, we need more people, well, we need more people in the other community too. Oh, we have the same avenue, the same mass transportation on Harlem. Why not we can impose over there high density? We can build even more. So the issue right here is wrong. Now our approach, we had to concentrate in our needs. We had to propose something. Michelle just mentioned that R10H is the right way to go. Yes, we can do that. We can provide inclusionary housing, voluntary inclusionary housing. I don't like the idea to impose housing, except in some specific lots that Adam mentioned. But in the other ones, it has to establish very well. We can give you, the developer, a little bit more benefits so they can be attractive to develop units or to build units within our community work. So the approach in this situation is, my perception is, we oppose that. Personally, myself, I oppose that.
Okay,
But
Marco,
I propose something.
you have plenty of opportunity to vote in a moment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, let's
Can I put a few cents in here?
please
I
do,
don't want to
Elizabeth.
stop
I'm
you, but
gonna do
I've
another
heard what
share,
everybody has said, and following
I
Marco,
hope.
yes, of course, the objective of the City of Yes housing opportunity is something we all support. But in my observation, this is a terribly flawed, intrinsically damaging proposal. And I think that just to mention a few, it doesn't consider its consequences, which are damaging. It doesn't consider the information, and there is a lot more information out now because there are a great many studies on this. This is a big problem of what actually does create affordable housing. This doesn't consider the information that's available. It doesn't protect the existing housing. It is too flawed. I think that there is enough information. Perhaps this committee could, after in a couple of months, start proposing steps that would create it, making recommendations for the future. But I don't think simply because the objective is good that we should support something that is so damaging. And that, sorry, but I just had to pipe over here. Thank you. Sorry,
No.
Anthony.
No. Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, we're now going to enter this world where we're going to look at these things individually. There are 15 of them. We'd like to have, Kevin is going to somehow make this poll work for each of these proposals. And we're starting, if you're seeing my screen, yes? Nod someone. Okay, thank you. And the first, first we're starting out with the easy, air quotes, easy ones, which are the low density housing proposals, low density districts, which are R1 through R5, R6 actually. We have no such districts in Community District 8. We have no such districts in Manhattan. This is large swaths of Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, and the Bronx at the outer edges of the Bronx. So the first proposal here is called town center zoning. Town center zoning means the ability to put slightly, and along with it is actually the next one, but the idea is to reintroduce buildings that have ground floor commercial, residential above, which have largely disappeared from some of these low density districts. The question is, if you want, you can read from the proposal on the right-hand side. Let's see. Okay, now this time we're going to be really short. Pretend you're paying by the word. Okay, Michelle.
Okay, I'll do that. This is a particularly good idea in certain areas, but there are many areas in Queens and Brooklyn and other parts of the city that are historic districts that have only two. They used to be called taxpayers. This, I think, will disrupt that. I know it doesn't apply to our district, but without that qualification, I'm not comfortable supporting this.
No, it does not. It would be something that would require landmarks to approve it in a historic district.
But it would be permitted in a historic district
if landmarks approved it.
Yeah, well,
but that's the thing.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification. I'm going to say no anyway because of the nature of landmarks these days and because everything is now passed to the staff level. And I'm very concerned about landmarks and its composition. So at this moment in time, I won't support it.
Marco, something different?
I'm not supporting. Let me explain you one example. I have a client on Jamaica Estates in Hillside Avenue. He asked me to say, look, I have a 3-building apartment. I'm going to build 1 story more. And I went with zoning. It was approved. Everything was nice. The only thing that the DOB said, okay, now bring the approval from DEP. When I went to DEP, they said, no, you know what? This is This is politicians that are playing games because we don't have the infrastructure to do that. So unless you have an infrastructure, especially for sewer and water, we are unable to do anything. And at the end of the day, I couldn't even increase one bedroom in that development. So therefore, if there are no infrastructure and just only zoning, without no money, without other developments, is wrong, period. Thank you.
Oh, I think the point of the exercise on the part of city planning is to create the ability for people to do these things, not to mandate it and not to pay for it. All right, Alita, Craig, and then Dean, hopefully very briefly, and then we're going to vote on this baby.
Do you know what this is so out of my wheelhouse, really? We know what the community boards in Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, the Bronx have to say about any of this? Because I don't feel competent to vote on it, and I'm frankly really suspicious.
Well, I think Alita, this is one of those issues which actually I think is a really good idea, and we're allowing our, just aside from the infrastructure issues, we're allowing our suspicion of city government to get in the way. There are lots of areas in Brooklyn, in Queens, where there are one-story buildings, garages, whatever, along major thoroughfares that could, in fact, be much better utilized as small apartment houses. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't disagree with you. I just think that there are issues with which we're not familiar because we don't live in those neighborhoods and don't know what the people who do live there have to say about it. And with respect to the transit-oriented development paragraph, it says that the buildings where they fit best, large lots, we don't have, our large lots are not modestly filled by 3 to 5 story buildings. So I think there's so
this is all for the R1 through.
I know that, but the way they describe it, there's just more and more intent to cram more and more buildings where the real estate developers want to be. And I'm not even going to talk about the mayor's personal interest in this, which is also just a suspicion, but I intend to vote no on everything because I just don't know enough about it to say yes. And the parts that apply to us are so ambiguous, so opaque, so deceptive that I can't help thinking that it's that way for the outer boroughs as well.
Okay. Craig.
Hi, thank you, Anthony. I just want to put out there that the core tenet of smart planning and smart growth is to have development focused in concentrated areas where you have that gradual increase to where you have what we're calling here town center zoning. I think especially if we are, as a community here, from what I'm hearing, inclined to have objections to a lot of the proposals that are part of this in regards to development in our community because we're worried about overdevelopment. Now we're trying to attack places where clearly there is underdevelopment in places where it makes sense to have development. So both for town center zoning and transit-oriented development, if we want to have a more sustainable, walkable city that adheres to what we call smart growth policies and such, I think we need to be supporting this, and I think it's something that the city would benefit from, and I think the communities that would probably be affected by this would largely benefit. Now, yeah, you're always going to find a few examples where it may not work, or there may be some communities that have specific issues, but don't let the imperfect be the enemy of the good, because this is a good policy. Thank you.
I agree, Craig. Actually, I agree completely on this, on actually all four of the low density district proposals. Dean.
Yes, I just wanted to echo what Craig and you said, Anthony. I agree with all of them. You know, we talk about like historic districts as well. Like town center zoning is really historic and, you know, itself. And, you know, all of these things, people just have more flexibility to, you know, develop and build and expand as they need to. So, you know, I agree with all of these, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Michael, then Judy, and then I think we might as well do our first poll and see how it goes.
Well, I'm just gonna make this quick. I mean, I'm always about development, but my question is, with development comes people and comes kids, and a little bit to back up what Mark was saying, the infrastructure. There's no talks about schools, police stations, firehouses, all things you need for a community to survive. So that's my only issue with what's going on with this city of Yes.
Thank you, Michael. I think again the point really is that this will allow for further development. I think in the past, and we don't notice so much in Manhattan, but in the past, there's been, for instance, a large growth in the number of schools in Queens and in areas of Brooklyn that have gotten bigger populations. And in part, it's because of the pressure of increased populations in those neighborhoods. But that's not the zoning issue, and that's really what we're talking about. We can say, yes, these are wonderful ideas, but you really can't do them if you don't improve the infrastructure. And I think that that's a sensible thing for us to say. Judy.
I call the question on the first two items, the town center zoning and the transit oriented development.
I think we're not really doing it quite that way, although it's a good, you have created a good stopping point. Do we, Kevin, whoops, there you are. Thank you, Judy. We're going to ask everybody to vote, I hope. There we are. Low density town center zoning. Do you support or not support? So just answer that and
then
submit
Anthony,
it.
Tell me when to end the poll.
Just give everybody a few minutes. Okay, we can come back and add, let's go through them. And if there are some that we want to come back to and add a modification comment, why don't we do that? Does that make sense?
Okay, so we're ending this one then.
Is everybody who wants to say something voted on it? Okay. Then the second one, which is the transit-oriented development, we'll now call on people. Andrew?
I just wanted to clarify if I'm supposed to vote or not. I voted on that last one again.
Go ahead and vote.
Okay.
Because
Just
it's not anonymous. We'll be able to frankly sort out the public. Perfect. Or count you separately. All right, transit-oriented development is a similar kind of thing. The idea being that development will be encouraged in areas that are relatively, and that is the word, relatively transit rich. Does anyone, Marco?
Okay, I think this is a great idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. But the problem is, where is the change? I didn't see in the proposal change on Grand Concourse. Grand Concourse has just only 6-story buildings, and it has the service, the B train and the D train. Where is that? There is nothing about the change of the density from R8, that's R8 to R10. They should be right R10, but the idea is incomplete. The main idea to support this is great idea.
You're right.
But the
Grand
problem
Concourse
is,
would be a very good candidate for transit center
but
development.
it's nothing in the system. Also, our Community Board 11. Community Board 11 had the same service that we have. Is R7. So this is the problem. The problem is they have good intentions, but the intentions are not complement with each other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Judy?
Time to vote. Call the question.
Oh, okay, thank you. All right, so on transit-oriented development, we're going to have our little poll on that. How are we doing? We good? If anyone is still thinking, I'm going to go to accessory dwelling units, and I would like to propose that we say accessory dwelling units are okay, but no basement apartments. I think that I'm just saying that that would be my sort of comment to that, to accessory dwelling units. Michelle.
The other thing to me that's particularly egregious on this is the ability to take an area, others disagree on this call, I know, an area that is zoned for single family homes, and having people bought that property, they wanted their own vision of the American dream, their own fence, their own backyard, for their kids to play, and to allow on a single family lot to build an accessory dwelling, which will impinge on the rights of your neighbor, who now does not have the surrounding space between houses that he thought he had when he purchased. The city of Yes thinks that this is a good idea because it would encourage parents to move into that or children to live there. But I contend that that's not for the city to know who will move in there, nor do they require that, nor can they police that. You will have a lot of Airbnbs. You will have people without a vested interest in the neighborhood. You will have neighbors being annoyed, and it is a terrible idea that on the backs of people who put their life savings into their single family home to now so dramatically and draconially change the zoning in this kind of a zone district. It's no way to solve the housing problem at the expense of others. Thank you.
Okay, Marco.
Thank you. Okay, the issue right here is density. Density, they want to increase probably the density in order to have the apartment in the rear yard. They want to change the garage for an apartment for the parents. I think that's the idea. But the issue right there is one. The entire city of New York is a fire district. That means they have to rebuild that garage in order to have the 2 or 3 hours the fire rating, which basically it make very expensive to do that, something like that. 1 and 2, this system to have more income, I think is going to be a lot of sense. And finally, let me differentiate one thing. Basements are legal. Cellar are illegal. So keep in mind when you say basement and cellar, basement is completely legal.
Cellar, Marco. I meant.
Thank you.
Okay, Gail. You're still muted, Gail. There
I
you go.
just want to quickly reinforce what Michelle said. I think when you've got a single family home and suddenly there is a cottage or a second dwelling on that property, it takes away from the quality of life for people. Yes, it may create more housing. It may not, because there's not going to be any enforcement. And what if you end up with a lot of transients, or the Airbnb, which you can see is another income producer for the family that lives there, but the quality of life for people on the other side is not good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail. Elizabeth Rose.
Thank you. Two comments. Anthony, to your comment about basement apartments, I'd like to remind everybody that the Broadway musical Wonderful Town was written about a woman living in a basement apartment in Greenwich Village. So I would oppose a additional comment to eliminate basement apartments from this. I am pro ADUs. I am pro legal and regulated basement apartments. Thank you.
Okay. Dean?
Yes, I'll be quick. I'm sorry. I'm, just have appeared and haven't, and now I'm maybe contributing more, but I've been working nights the past week. But yes, I lived in DC for a few years. Accessory dwelling units. We had basement apartments there. They worked out for us. My grandmother, after she moved with my parents, lived in the equivalent of a ADU like unit above our garage. It's so this is New York City. This is the sort of place we would expect them. I think that's great.
Okay, thank you, Dean. Judy, I bet you want us to vote.
No, surprise. This was my main reason for coming. I have a comment on this one.
Okay.
And Elizabeth, I remember Wonderful Town as if I saw it yesterday. And they had a window in their basement. True, you saw the feet and the people walking by. I think any kind of below ground apartment where there is no window, where people cannot see out, should not be allowed under any kind of circumstances, no matter what the city is doing. I think it's just terrible for people to live below ground and not have a window to be see out, and I will not vote for this.
Okay, Judy, I believe that Elizabeth, I'll just try and save us an unmuting. I believe that Elizabeth, in her reference to legal, is that it is the building code and multiple dwelling law definition of basement versus cellar. A basement is 50% above grade. A cellar is less than 50% above grade. A cellar is not allowed. In theory, certain if you do a lot of other things, you can have a legal basement apartment. The question is really whether or not legal, whether or not this represents really an expansion of that to what is currently not legal, is something else that I think they haven't figured out yet, and it would remain illegal.
That, Anthony, that is something that could be found out in advance of the next meeting. Ask. I am reasonably confident from my experience with working in the city that they are not proposing basement apartments with no windows here. They are proposing that there be regulations and legality to creating basement apartments where certain conditions exist, including egress and windows.
Yes. And also there are all sorts of kind of strange rules about two-family houses, the way that a two-family house would be split. It's allowed to be split horizontally, I guess, or vertically, unless it's the other way around. You can have an apartment.
They
on
can
top of
currently
another
only be
one.
split
Right.
vertically or horizontally, and the idea is to also allow vertical.
Allow for side by side, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure where that falls exactly. It might fall in district fixes, which is, oh no, accessory dwelling units. We have to vote on that.
Mhm.
I'm waiting for our thing. Okay, here we are. Accessory dwelling units. Judy, while we're all voting.
Does that mean that you're going to find out before we vote again?
Yes, yes. We'll find out. Yes.
Required?
We're going to do some questions for city planning, and we will have answers before we meet as a full board.
Thank you.
And we're keeping track of those questions. Okay. Alita?
Thank you. Do district fixes apply to historic districts or just to non-historic districts? Because given their summary, it's not clear.
We will ask that question. For our purposes this evening, let's presume.
I don't think that's safe, presuming. And as a lawyer, if it's not in the statute, it doesn't count. So
Well,
all comments
Alita,
Congress makes doesn't
Alita.
count. What? Sorry. You can mute me.
Okay.
Anthony, are we done with poll number 3, accessory dwelling?
Believe we are done with number 3.
Is it okay if I share the results for the first 3 we have?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so does everyone see the results for number 3?
Okay, we don't like accessory dwelling units.
Okay, I'm gonna go back and show everyone number 2. Does everyone see number 2?
Yes. Oh no, we only see number 3. I only see number 3. Wait a minute, let me close number 2. All right. Number 3, rather. Number 2, I don't see. Right.
Well, number 2 is 10 in support and 7 do not support.
Okay. And number 1, town center zoning.
Number 1 is 10 in support, 7 do not support.
Okay. Now, in answer to a question, we are allowing non-members to vote. We can separate their votes out when we report out to the full board. And I think it's part of what we're doing here is we're trying to get a sense of the board, of the committee, but also a sense of the community at large. I mean, we don't have that many community members here, but it's that's why anyway. All right, district fixes. And I apologize, Alita, for being short with you. The district fixes generally are to allow for slightly greater density in those low density districts and to alter minimum lot size and width restrictions slightly in Brooklyn and Queens, and somewhat greater in the very large districts, in the very large district, large single family districts like on Staten Island or in fact in Riverdale. So anyway, these allow for slightly taller buildings. We're talking about a foot or 2 taller, and adjusting yard requirements. And in a way, it's one of the things is the rear yard. The rear yard requirement in our everywhere is 30 feet. In some of the single family districts, it has already been reduced to 20 R2X among them. And so this would sort of spread out some of the slightly larger density that is allowed in certain of the outer boroughs. I don't know what there is to say about it really, Alita.
I'm sorry, and I interrupted you, Anthony. No apology from you necessary, but I am so uncomfortable voting for things not in our district, knowing that we have 47, if you take out all of Manhattan, community boards voting on whether things are appropriate for us when they don't understand if they don't live or work here. Why should we be voting? It should not be put together like this. I just don't know why we should be voting for things that affect other people when we don't know the issues, we don't know how they feel, and they're going to be voting on, well, what's another 20 feet on Third Avenue, or what's another 20 feet on a side street, or why not get rid of historic districts? People are voting on stuff we know nothing about, and I'm just so uncomfortable. And that's why one of the reasons, a big reason, I'm just voting no on all of this stuff. I don't feel right actually voting.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I think that this is an unusual, in a way, this is an unusual opportunity. In 1961, no one was consulted when they wrote the zoning resolution. Likewise, in 1916, no one was consulted when the experts, with air quotes, wrote the zoning resolution. And so this is a unique opportunity for all of us collectively to take a look at some changes that may or may not be good, but in some respects, we can't, the same way that people who live on Staten Island can't know our problems and issues unless they look at them. We can't know theirs, and I understand that. But rather than having everything imposed on us, if intuitively we think something is a good idea, we might want to say it is. That's my only comment on it. Marco, then we have Elizabeth, Craig, and then we're going to vote.
Anthony, I think we had to deal one more thing, which is very hard to deal, is point of information. In this case, the point of information is extremely crucial. For instance, people doesn't, I'm sorry, with Elizabeth Rose, doesn't understand what is basement and what is cellar. What it is right here is basement is legal. Right now, you can put an apartment. You don't legalize nothing because it's legal. Basement. What is illegal is the basement in the way more or less that describes Judy. That is the problem. And that's where the people die.
Marco, I think the difference here. No,
but this is what it is. It means, look, and the other point is right here, I feel like a leader. I feel uncomfortable to vote for somebody that I do not understand. Even though myself, I have a lot of jobs almost everywhere in the city. So I understand the idea of the neighborhoods. All of them, they love to have more affordable, more dwelling units. And that's my clients. Thank you.
Elizabeth and Craig.
Thank you.
One at a time.
I want to address this to, I mean, Alita and Marco have both expressed discomfort in voting on things that are not in our area. So I want to address this specifically to you, but to everyone more broadly. One of the strengths of this overall big picture set of proposals is that it affects everybody in the city. That this is not a spot rezoning of just certain neighborhoods. This is not we are only going to make the most dense areas more dense. This is not a single strategy that only affects one group of people in the city. The strength of a lot of City of Yes is that it affects every part of the city, every neighborhood. And the idea of every neighborhood needs to create more housing units is, I think, a very powerful and palatable idea. And I think there are good ideas for other neighborhoods. And there are going to be some things that in our neighborhood we don't necessarily think are good ideas that other people would say, yes, we think that is a perfectly fine idea. But the reality is the big picture here is in aggregate, you can't have a solution for New York City that is only affecting a small portion of the population. And they have done at least a great effort at identifying what are things that could be done in each type of neighborhood and each type of existing zoning, such that a broad policy of increasing housing units in the city or creating the framework that would enable increased housing units throughout the city affect all areas of the city in relatively appropriate ways. Not all of them necessarily, but certainly a lot of them. And I think that is a big idea that we should be supporting, because honestly, the alternative is put it all in Manhattan because that's where people really want to live and it's already so dense. And that is the alternative. Thank you.
Craig.
Elizabeth, that was beautifully said, and I'd like to expand on that. So I understand the apprehension for us to take positions where we are not entirely comfortable, but this is the City of Yes proposal. And we as a community board, yes, we are acting as agents for our community, but we are still part of this great city. And what happens elsewhere in the city does affect us. And I think it is really important that if we are not comfortable with these proposals because we don't know about it, it is up to us to do the due diligence to understand what they are and the implications of them. And I would please urge anyone who is not comfortable with something not to vote no tonight because you don't know enough about it, but to take time over the next couple of weeks to learn. You do not have to vote in this poll tonight. Don't skew the results if you don't really know what you're voting on. Just don't vote now. And then when we get to our land use meeting where we are voting on this, you will have had the chance to read a little more into what the proposal means, look at how other community boards in those areas that are affected by it feel about it. And if those arguments resonate in one way or another, you could base your vote off of that. I think that in general, a lot of these targeted approaches to dealing with things in these low density districts are really important from a citywide context in terms of what that means for Manhattan if these weren't to go through. And I think this is a good idea, and I strongly would support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, let's see. We got Marco and Alita in a kind of response, I'm sure, and then we'll do the next poll.
Thank you. I think I have to respond because the idea is next. Yeah, nobody, as I said before, nobody is against to build affordable housing or general housing. Nobody in the common sense. The issue is if you don't understand and you want to impose other neighborhoods, we don't know how they're going to feel that part. And secondly, it means, I'm sorry, I don't want to attack nobody, but I do not have the rhetoric of some fellow community members that my rhetoric is very small and very limited because English is not my native language. Otherwise, I will make the rhetoric even deeper and precise. So the point is basically, I feel uncomfortable for that reasons. It's not because we had to demonstrate this, the CDOE it has to do better. They said at the beginning 500,000 dwelling units they're gonna build. Now they came out with 110. De Blasio in 15 years. Now De Blasio said they built 140,000 dwelling units. So the issue right here, this proposal is the wrong approach. Without no data that proves what are they doing the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Alita?
I support affordable housing. I support the right of people to live here. If there weren't affordable housing for middle income people, I wouldn't have been able to grow up in the Bronx. So I understand that people want to live in the city, and I understand that people will want to force all of the housing into Manhattan, but just the same way that I can't say there's when you vote, the city provides a booklet with the pros and the cons of each candidate or each ballot proposal, or that's certainly what they did with the city charter. This seems to be, it is the most sweeping, as Elizabeth Rose has pointed out, and Anthony has pointed out, the most sweeping change to the zoning resolution since 1960, yet we're given a very short amount of time. We're given very little information about the impact. And it just seems that well, I feel more comfortable making a blanket statement that I support affordable housing. I support more housing in general, less luxury housing for foreign investors, and more of everything else, but not necessarily in this district. So saying no to something because we don't have information, or saying yes just it doesn't feel wrong when saying yes just on the basis of principle without understanding the impact feels really wrong to me too. So I don't know if that's an adequate response, but that's how I'm going with this. And it's not my burden, and it shouldn't be my burden to find out what the city has in mind. It should be the city's burden to provide the information to all of the community boards when there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of this stuff that's very dense, very complicated, very difficult to understand. And yet we're supposed to analyze it in a meeting of a few hours at a general community board meeting and vote yes or no on something that is so dramatically significant. I just can't agree with that way of doing things. And I think that is an effort to pull the wool over our eyes in some respects. And yes, this stuff looks great on its face, but I frankly just do not know. And as a lawyer, I couldn't write a brief if I don't know the subject that I'm writing about. And so I can't vote, and I wouldn't vote for a candidate for office if I don't know what they stand for. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alita. All right, Rita.
I agree with Alita 100%. And the one thing that is missing from every single aspect in this entire proposal is the caps. Where does it, if we say yes, do we say yes and then people interpret it their way, and we end up with 20-story buildings, 100-story buildings in mid-blocks? We don't have any caps.
No, actually, Rita, that's not true. The proposals clearly state, for instance, we'll see that on the next page, that R8B, for instance, will not necessarily it's a good thing, but R8B will go from its current height limit of 85 feet to 105 feet if 20% of it is affordable housing. That's very definite, very, very clear. And it's all actually very clear in that regard. Now, we can say we don't like it. That's fine. But I think that in terms of height and caps, it is generally pretty clear.
Thank you, Anthony. I also have a question that I don't want an answer for. How many apartments are we going to have to build in order to make a dent in affordable housing? 20%, 25%. Those are they're numbers, but how many buildings will we have to build in this city in order to address the problem, which is affordable housing? So I can't vote for these. I just won't. And it isn't because I haven't studied it. I haven't studied it. It's not my job to study it. It's not my job to understand every single. I'm not an architect. I'm not a developer. I know in my heart that if you're building 75 apartments unaffordable and 25 apartments affordable, that you're not making a dent. And so do you know that. So thank you.
Rita, you are absolutely correct. I mean, you are making a dent, but it's a small one. It's the maybe the most important point of all of this is that the city of Yes represents an effort to reform the zoning to make it easier to build housing of all types. Whether or not we agree with that basic principle is one thing, but I think that it is it's important to bear that in mind. The city isn't going to build anything. They stopped building things 60, 50 years ago. The federal government isn't going to build anything. They stopped building things 50 years ago. Thank you, Nixon. 55 years ago. The state isn't going to build anything for all of those same reasons. And so we are, unfortunately, and I say that with deep sadness, we are unfortunately in the hands of private enterprise. And so it is a question not of doing the right thing, but of trying to do the least wrong thing. And I think that's city planning's attempt. Whether or not they succeeded is another question. But I think that that's their attempt, and we are unfairly expecting them to have more power than they do, which is very little. And I'd like to move to this so we can get to medium and large size districts. Okay. Kevin, oh, there you are. Great, thank you. Okay, while we're doing that, this is now medium and high density. So this is us, or sort of. And the point here is to eliminate zoning. One of the things that I think we might not like is eliminating zoning distinctions between wide and narrow streets, which is to say that a similar zone, this would eliminate what Elizabeth Ashby spoke about earlier, mentioned earlier, which is that Lexington has a lower height limit because it's a narrower street. This would, in fact, allow for no distinctions between let's say an R8 narrow and an R8 wide street, although we don't have any R8 wide streets in here. But the one thing that would do another thing would be to increase the FAR by 20% for affordable housing. And that would bump the height limit on R8B to 105 from 85, R8B being the sort of bulk of our mid blocks that are affected, in a way, affected by this. So it expands, the notion is to expand the rule for senior housing and supportive housing to all new housing citywide. Michelle.
I just wanted to make a general comment. There were no studies for any of these recommendations. And nobody actually signed this presentation. I have been asking who wrote this and never was able to get an answer. It comes out of city planning. We don't know who. I'm sure a lot of people worked on it. I'd love their names on it. And if we could find out who they were, I think that would be very helpful because we could address their intent and their research and that kind of thing. The second thing is when they present, as with any city agency, this is true if the Department of Education presented to us, if the Department of Transportation presents to us, they present to us with glowing affirmative adjectives. They don't present to us with just the facts. Like they didn't come and say they want to eliminate zoning distinctions between wide and narrow and leave it at that. It's always because this is going to give us more affordable this and bigger this and better that and all that kind of thing. And that those conclusions are not necessarily accurate when they have, with the creation of this proposal. That's all I can say. And so I don't like to listen to their glowing adjectives. I like to know where these proposals came from. And just because the zoning resolution is old does not mean it's a document that's obsolete. It does not mean it's a document that needs no tweaking. This is far from tweaking. They completely overhauled the entire zoning resolution for the entire city of New York. And I guarantee you that the input was not necessarily by knowledgeable professional people or from people who had a sense of history. I'd like to know who wrote it. I don't like it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. I would in fact argue that this is not sweeping enough, but that's my opinion. Marco.
Okay, I think that's what I would like to discuss. Look, the RAB, what happened is next. Some of the people, they're going to develop, others not. Those that do not develop, they're going to say the air right. Then it start what I call the dancing of the air rights. If those that they decided to develop, they put an example on a lot 100 by 100, they saying that they're going to build 11 affordable houses and 56. Knowing the market rate, they don't build 100% of the 56. They will build probably 50 or 25%. So we're going to build less. And we're going to have less affordable housing because right now in this section is completely almost like the borough president said, is most of this development in the mid block are rent control and rent stabilized housing. So it's affordable housing in some way. And if those that transfer the air right, they don't put a penny to improve those properties that has been transferred the air rights, I think is wrong, this application. I strongly recommend you should go no. I feel confident in this part. Thank you.
Elizabeth.
This is one where I'd like to suggest that we take the three big points separately, because I think there are very different arguments for these 3 points and I'm putting here the three that they have highlighted. One is increase the FAR and create the affordable housing preference with 20% bonus. Everywhere, I think that is a big idea. I think that is something that I would support. I hope others would also support it. Eliminating zoning distinctions between wide and narrow streets. I don't think that's such a good idea. The distinctions are largely around height and wide versus narrow. I think there's a legitimate distinction there. And then finally, increasing the height limit on R8B to 105 feet. This was the issue that Anthony, you so ably demonstrated in our last meeting, that the increases proposed in heights for different zone types were disproportionate. And so I would simply like to say that any height limit increase on zones should be exactly proportionate to the 20% additional FAR, and not simply follow they gave a justification for it in the full board meeting last week. And I would propose taking this as a separate item and saying increases in height limits need to be proportionate. So that is my suggestion on this set of issues.
Is there a sense that others feel the same way? Maybe a raised hand would be good. Rita feels that way. Who else?
Alita.
Alita. Okay. So a number of people feel that way. I don't know how we split that up. In other words, I think as a group, we are in favor of the increasing the FAR for affordable housing. Or yes, we appear to believe that height limit increases should be proportionate to the increase in floor area. And that does
So this
not
is
or
effectively a modification.
right. And that I'm sorry, Elizabeth, and that we're against eliminating the zoning distinctions between wide and narrow streets. I think most of us.
If you want to vote on that three as a package, I'd be perfectly happy to vote on that.
Do you want to do it? Can we do it that way? So in other words, if you say yes, you're also saying no to eliminating the zoning distinctions, unless someone is really wild to do that. This is just to give a sense to the full board. I see Alita's hand up and also Michelle's. Alita.
I just have a question, Anthony. With
Sure.
the change in the FAR that the state legislature approved, how does that affect all of this?
It only does at the top end. In other words, you're allowed to, I believe, allowed to maintain lower FARs, but on the higher existing zones can stay as they are. It's those new ones that we just found out about last week, 11, 11A, and 12, which allow for greater FAR.
So I don't understand how we could vote to support raising the FAR when the state is raising the FAR and we don't know the impact on this. And if we believe that anyone is going to maintain a lower FAR than they're allowed by law, when the real estate industry has been pushing for it for years, I've got a bridge to sell. I just don't understand how this.
Well, then we can just vote no. We can say we don't think it's a good idea, period. And
That's what I
fine.
intend to do. I raised my hand, Elizabeth, because I support dividing it into three, which makes sense because they're all very significant, as you pointed out. But I don't know how anything works together. So I'm so sorry. I am. I don't mean to sound flippant. I am.
Michelle, I'll get back to you, Elizabeth. Michelle.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that if we accepted Elizabeth's changes, that those of us who just want to vote no, we'd be voting no on a different thing than what their paperwork says. So I would suggest that we do an up or down vote on this and then take a separate vote on the changes that Elizabeth is proposing.
Okay, all right, here's a compromise. I say we vote on this as it is and report that we had a I think considerable discussion on these three particular points to emphasize them for the general board discussion, because that's what we're doing. What we're doing is we're kind of teeing things up for the board as a whole.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine with me. I just want to make sure that what we're voting on is what this says.
And then we'll report it out that way in the minutes. Okay.
Fine.
Great.
Next.
I'd just like to get back to Alita on her question. The state raising the cap from allowing greater than 12 allows the city to map new zones that would be above a 12 inclusive of universal
Affordable,
affordable
yeah.
housing preference. It does not mean that any blocks are in fact going to be rezoned. Any rezoning to one of those higher zones would have to go through ULURP, whether that is a specific application by a developer for a specific site or a more broad rezoning of a neighborhood. So the state vote, the state approval to create zones greater than a residential 10+2 bonus is not affected by this. And this doesn't affect that. It allows for the potential of new zones that would have a greater than 12 FAR for residential. It does not change existing zones.
Right. Okay. That's it.
And just a reminder, the way we did City of Yes for Economic Opportunity was we were allowed, the way the full board did it was we proposed resolutions on each major section like this, and we proposed our own modifications.
Correct. And we
the
will undoubtedly do that again
And
next month.
with modifications that were proposed, there was then an up or down vote on that proposal inclusive of modifications.
Rita.
When it says a percentage for affordable housing, I would be more comfortable if it had the area percentage of the area median income. It changes every year. It's put out by HUD, and it's a compilation of the entire
No, it's what's mandated by this is 60% is an average across that 20% of floor area of 60% AMI. So some apartments will be for less than 60% AMI and some will be for higher than 60% AMI. But the idea is that the average across the bonus floor area will be 60% of AMI.
Thank you.
And that's in it. Okay, let's do this one because we have a really easy one next. He laughed. I'm going to move on while we're still thinking. The next one is citywide and is lift costly parking mandates. As they were gleeful to point out last week, there is no new parking mandated in Manhattan or Long Island City as of now. This, I think, is a bad decision. And what City of Yes is proposing is to eliminate parking mandates throughout the city. And those of us who own cars lament the cost of garages on the Upper East Side because there are so few, and because of a deliberate policy by the part of the Department of City Planning. At any rate, I know Craig hates parking and cars in general, but the question is whether or not the city continues to require parking anywhere. It doesn't prevent parking, but it doesn't mandate any parking. So Judy.
Maybe I have this wrong, but you'll correct me. Currently, isn't there a limit on how many cars, if you build a new building, your garage can have?
Yeah.
So now this would do what? If I want to build a new 30-story building, would this let me, if this was approved, would I be able to park as many cars as I wanted in the garage? Go down as many floors as I want? I'm not
Not
quite.
in Manhattan. You can't do anything in Manhattan to put in a new parking garage, period.
No, but
Paragraph.
I'm talking about
Finish it.
if we approve this, what will this then allow?
No, well, that's what I'm saying. You can't
Oh,
do
it
it now.
won't.
It won't let you do it in the future. It will. Oh, great. Oh, interesting. Okay. It will allow people to build garages. It will not force them to build garages. In outside of Manhattan. Within Manhattan, there will still be no garages.
It does. I'm not asking about a separate garage. I'm asking about garages in
No,
apartments.
garages within buildings. You won't be
Right.
able to build them. You can't build them in Manhattan, and you won't be forced to build them anywhere else. The net effect will be that buildings will not have garages in the outer, new buildings will not have garages in the outer boroughs. Why? They just won't. It costs a lot of money to build a garage. The city Department of City Planning has made that abundantly clear.
Yes,
That makes
but they
sense.
also charge a lot of money to park in a garage. So eventually they can recoup their costs.
Maybe, maybe not. I suspect that it will lead to many fewer garage parking spaces in residential buildings in the city or outside of
And
Manhattan.
I personally would not support that.
Right. Craig.
Yeah, first, I think it was wildly inappropriate for you to try to characterize how you think I
I'm
feel about
sorry.
cars and
I'm sorry. Look, it's late. I apologize.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I do not hate cars. I do not hate parking. As an urban planner, as a transportation planner, I think it's important to point out the distinction between what this will actually do as opposed to what we are encouraging as a city in terms of sustainability and in terms of what makes sense given the densities in certain neighborhoods, and in terms of encouraging the types of developments that won't encourage car use. And I think that's the distinction. There's a difference between hating cars and being against cars versus discouraging cars from creating a lot of the issues that we see in terms of a place as densely populated as New York City and Manhattan, where we know congestion is an issue. And in terms of the impacts on our community, it's not going to have an impact because it is absolutely the case that we do not have parking mandates in this community. That doesn't preclude developers from putting in parking. And if it's a question of should we be incentivizing parking, which is, I think, what the underlying discussion here is, the answer absolutely should be no, especially in the context of affordable housing. I can say in all honesty, there is a lack of parking in many respects in certain parts of the city. But I think that is because we have seen a reverse in the terms of the trends where we have more car ownership, and we do have more former garages that are being converted over to other uses because they are not necessarily profitable and because there are perhaps better uses for them. So I think if you extend that to other portions of the city, I think what we're saying here is no one should be required to do it. It's worked in other cities where by eliminating the parking mandates, you actually encourage development and you create thriving communities. And I think that's what this is about. I strongly support this, and I hope that people don't conflate what's intended, the intent of this is from the idea that this is going to be transformative for this community, because it's not.
Thank you. Dean.
Yes, mostly echoing both you and Craig. This is not a sort of this is not a ban on parking. My building here does not have parking in it, and that's fine. Obviously, I have seen garages around this, my neighborhood. I don't know how anyone couldn't make a profit on the extreme price of parking. If somebody wants to make tons of money building a parking garage or spending the extra money to build more parking spaces in a building they're building, that's fine. I don't see why we need to mandate it for, new apartment buildings. Why should an apartment building be more expensive and include parking? My building doesn't have parking and it's fine. So I think this is just a no-brainer. We don't need parking mandates, especially in New York. People, if some place just doesn't have access to transit, then the developer is going to figure, hey, this will sell better if we have parking spots with it. And that's all good. That's all I have to say.
Okay. All right, Sebastian, very quickly.
I'm just going to propose that we vote on this topic
Thank
of
you.
parking mandates.
Let's do it. Okay. Thank you, Kevin. It's coming, I'm sure. There we go. Okay, while you're voting, this next one is to convert non-residential buildings to housing. The notion here is to expand to the entire city and to allow more recent buildings built up to around 1990, I think is the number, and to allow conversions to different types of housing. Although that's sort of the different types of housing piece, the small and shared housing, we can get into in the next one. Conversions currently, excuse me, conversions currently allow for conversions of office spaces built before, I think it's 1978, to be converted to apartments, traditional apartments. This proposal would allow a greater number of newer office buildings up till 1990 throughout the city to be converted to residential uses. Obviously, they would still have to satisfy all of the zoning and multiple dwelling requirements on the books. And it is unclear, certainly in Manhattan and absolutely in our district, whether or not this would really make much difference. Michelle.
Does this allow for these different types of housing to be in one building?
Yes, actually, I believe it would.
Thank you.
Okay. Convert non-residential buildings to housing. Let's have a sense of us. Now, these things are actually the next item, which is small and shared housing, is one piece of this is actually allowed under the multiple dwelling law, which is the shared housing. Altering the minimum size unit at 500 square feet from, well, in larger zones, 650 is, and that would be a citywide thing. So I think we've all expressed opinions in the past about small and shared housing. I think we can probably vote on it immediately. And nobody's stopping me. And finally, on this page, with just, I think, 3 or 4 more to go, is campus infill. And this affects us. A campus is a lot with multiple buildings on it larger than 1.5 acres. Most of the campuses in the city are NYCHA properties, and this would affect us, obviously, with the Holmes and Isaacs houses if we so desired. It would change the rules on how close new buildings would be to old, and it would also change the rules on height. It would allow for lower buildings in this sort of super block. Marco.
I think here is an opportunity real clear to develop affordable housing. And I think that what happened in NYCHA development, they are hoarding floor area that has to be built, especially for low-income families. I think the director of housing at the city planning, he expressed very well the idea of this development, and we had to support. Somebody said, "Oh, they removing my children's playground." No, it's not, because they can be put in the open space that is required to have it. So they can have it for the children a playroom. So in this case, the NYCHA development is a waste of the land, and now the land is very expensive. And this is the time that we had to stand up and listen. Let's go build more affordable housing. This is the right location. Cheap. There is no price. We don't have to pay anything for the land. Now the only cost, it will be just only the construction. And I think we had to support this one. And thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Alita, and then Michelle, and then it looks like we can.
Does it specify affordable housing for 100% of the units? Because I'd like to remind everyone, and for those who were not on the board back in 2019 or 2020, there was a board hearing with NYCHA residents about the infill project they proposed to be built by a private developer who was going to get a lot of money from brownfield substitute to clear up brownfield problems and all kinds of tax and other subsidies for the city and the state and the feds. And it was still going to be at least 50% market rate, 50 stories tall on a side street. It was a huge problem for residents who talked about a fear that they would lose their community, lose the ability to have barbecues and picnics with people from the other buildings. And I just think that this doesn't cover any of that. And it's really a lot of concern for people who live in the NYCHA properties, and to just vote yes on this without understanding what their fears are when they live in such dire circumstances to begin with, I think is unfair. That's it. Thank you.
Michelle.
I know that infill basically refers to NYCHA. I've asked this question before, but there's a lot of talk within the city of Yes about building on areas, a property that churches own. The church exists, and then there's area. Is that considered in this infill? Because it doesn't specifically
if it's large enough,
exclude it.
It has to be 1.5. I think it has to be 1.5 acres.
Well, that's possible. You take a church like St. John the Divine and a couple of others that actually did build apartment houses on their property.
So the answer basically is yes, it does. The zoning lot has to be a large zoning lot in order for it to work. I think if you're looking at places like Brooklyn and Queens, and even Staten Island and the Bronx, I suppose, you would be more apt to find those large properties that are not NYCHA properties.
But it can also include areas like the Frick, where there's been proposals to build an apartment house on that.
No, the Frick isn't big enough.
Garden.
No, and they didn't. They wanted to build more of their addition in the garden.
Well, they did. They built up, though, more than out. But okay, the point is, this does not exclude that. That was my question. Thank you very much.
Okay, Rita.
I was with Alita when this Fetner was the
Yeah.
developer who was going to, they were concerned, the residents were concerned with light and air, which would have been cut off by this building that they could almost open the window and touch. So it's not, just barbecues or whatever. It was light and air, and it really meant living or not living properly. So, thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Peggy.
Oh, thanks very much. I just want to point out that our district, the Upper East Side, has among the least open space of any community in all of the city. And so I believe that we ought to cherish whatever open space that we have for the greenery, for the air, for the light, for the quality of life. So I am going to oppose the infill, and I hope others will join me too if they agree that our Upper East Side needs as much open space as we could possibly get. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Peggy. Okay, infill. Let's do it. Thank you. That's all right. The Department of City Planning is proposing 3 new zoning districts, 11, 11A, and 12. Last Wednesday, they told us that they thought that those might go, where there are other very FAR heavy districts, but they didn't say they wouldn't ever support rezoning, let's say, 2nd Avenue to allow buildings that are at least 400 feet high and have an FAR of 18. I think a proposal of new zones is just my opinion. I think a proposal of new zones that without any notion of where they might be located in the future is sort of a dangerous idea. So on the right-hand side, you see what 11, 11A, and 12 will be with the affordability bonus, our FAR 15, 15, and 18. So let's vote on that. This is sort of like saying whether or not you like the FAR cap. I will confess to absolutely having no understanding of the update to mandatory inclusionary housing. Perhaps Adam can illuminate us as to what this really means, especially for us.
Are you talking about the R11A and R12?
No, update to mandatory inclusionary housing. The next item on the...
I'm not entirely sure, other than currently there are 2 MIH options. One's a 25% affordable and one's
Right.
a 30% affordable. This is giving a 3rd option to developers.
Which would be 20% with an average of 40%.
Right.
Now, we can also just pass on this one and ask for clarification. Am I seeing some nodding? Marco's nodding, Peggy's nodding. All right, let's skip this one. Okay. Sliver law. Elizabeth Ashby is the expert on sliver law. It's her law. The sliver law imposes height limits related to street width on lots less than 45 feet
Yes,
wide.
I suppose I would call me the mother of the sliver law. I proposed it years ago when I moved here. There was a sliver proposed, went to the community board, and they said there was no law against it. I said there should be, so they said, well, if you feel that way, propose one, so I did. And I think that people don't know how horrible slivers are because it was a successful law, and there haven't been. It was enacted in, I think, 83, and there haven't been any. But they were so horrible and so unpopular and so unliked that not even the developers opposed the sliver law. So I think that people forget how horrible they were, but the sliver law is the sore thumb law, really, and I certainly don't want to see it back, slivers back. So but there we are.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Elizabeth Rose.
Thank you, Anthony. I'd like to make a little bit of the opposite case. And this is not disrespectful of Elizabeth Ashby, but it's simply some different observations. I actually work very close to Morgan Court, which is the sliver building on Madison Avenue between 35th and 36th Street that was featured in the movie with Sharon Stone, and that was kind of a creepy movie, but it was one of the famous sliver buildings that I know the sliver law was in part a reaction to. And to me, and Anthony, I'm going to disagree with your summary here in terms of it allowing tall, narrow buildings in the mid-block areas of CD8, because we do have a height cap on R8B, that this really more affects wide streets and avenues where there may still be some older, narrow buildings and Morgan Court, in that example, there were originally townhouses on that block. And so what the sliver law does is it basically creates a forced order of time of development. It basically says, okay, if there's one building on the block that's already tall, there has to be an order of development that literally goes from adjacent to that building, then to the next building, then to the next building, then to the next building. Whereas, so all what you're really doing is forcing an order of development.
Okay. Yes.
Whereas if you allowed the buildings, to be built as the developer chose to build them, they would eventually over time fill in and lose that gap in quality.
Now, one of the things, I don't believe that I was incorrect. Since the new height limit for R8B will be 105 feet, you could, in fact, if you so desired, build a building 20 feet wide and 105 feet tall.
Yeah, yes, you could. And
okay, I'm not saying it's practical. I'm
than
not
its
saying somebody would
adjacent
want
building.
to, but you could.
Typically, when we are talking about sliver buildings, we have been, the bigger impact and the gap tooth look that we have talked about have been when they are occurring on blocks where you might have a very tall building and then some shorter buildings,
Yes,
like the group
I know what you're saying, but I'm suggesting
those
that
are the more extreme examples.
I am suggesting that we should look to the places where eliminating the sliver law would affect us.
It would also affect us on the avenues.
Yes,
And on
and would
wide
be a bad
streets.
idea there too. But anyway, all right. I think
But
we made
in
our
either
points.
case, whether it's in an R8B or whether it's on an avenue or a wide street, what the slivered law does is it forces an order of development that is very restrictive. And if you didn't force that order of development, the gap tooth variety that people seem to object to as part of the problem would go away over time eventually. I'm done.
Gail.
Yeah, I have a question because it appears to me that if you have a small lot, given the cost of construction in New York City, how would you end up with any building that was not super tall to make it something that would produce revenue for the developer?
Yes, you would always want to maximize the floor area available to you if you could. I'm not sure that that's something that is part of. We should think
that's
about
why
the possibilities rather than the probabilities of what may or may not happen.
So, and I also think that if you look at Morgan Court and you look at the buildings adjacent to it, I don't think that it is particularly attractive. I think it detracts from the streetscape.
Well,
so I just don't see the value of having the sliver law opposed, or I should say amended, changed. What Elizabeth did was save the air and light and everything else for the community, and I think we should keep the sliver law.
Okay. Marco, unless you have something different.
Yeah, I think I have to congratulate Elizabeth and you, Anthony. There is a disagreement and it has to be respectful from each other. I think is great. Always is good to have different point of view. But my point of view is about the sliver law. It's going to create actually pins in the city. And that doesn't look nothing attractive in the skylight of the city of New York. That is my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Okay, we can do this. Let's do it now. Kevin, thank you. Sliver law. So this would be eliminating the sliver law. And now this next one, which is kind of interesting, basically takes the quality housing program and expands it to all new housing in the city. Quality housing, and there's a list of the things on the right-hand side, basically mandates a number of amenities that are then given at least a very slight, and it is pretty slight, a slight break on, you're allowed more deductions from the gross square footage to the FAR. It's currently mandatory in R6 through R10 contextual zones. The idea is that it would then be expanded citywide. And I think it's basically been an extremely successful program. It has rules that are more produce more compact buildings. It's not towers on a base. I think in general it's a good program. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, Marco.
I think you're absolutely right. Quality of the housing is the future of the housing in New York City. We have to build a different type of the standards, and this elevate the standard of housing in New York. It will be even superior to those buildings in Park Avenue and Fifth Avenue. A good example is when you walk into one of these buildings, you will come out from the elevator. It is claustrophobic unless you know if you live over there, you know where you're going. But if you walk inside, you walk in a box. that there is no direction. I feel myself sometimes to get it back, go or take the elevator and leave. So I think it's a very good program. I strongly recommend. There are a lot of things that improve, notably the quality of housing in the entire city. I think it's great. Very good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Alita.
Thanks. Couple things. My understanding is that the 50-story building on the corner of 83rd and 3rd got to be 50 stories because of quality housing when it's a luxury building. Second of all, when was the last time anyone saw a laundry facility where you went in and there was an array of washing machines and dryers on the street that you could go to? What building does not provide laundry facilities? What building does not provide a place to dump your garbage if you live in an apartment building? I don't understand why providing the most basic things gives people more right to a higher floor density or more height or something like that. These are just basic living things. Plus, I don't understand density per corridor. And unless there's a central courtyard, which I think a lot of new buildings don't have, if I'm correct, but I could be wrong, how are you going to get daylight into corridors? So I just don't get this whole thing.
But
Anyway,
if you don't provide it, you don't get the bonus. It's sort of a simple way of looking at it. And it is in fact not, it is encouraging people to frankly build better buildings. And the reason that building is so tall is probably because of zoning lot mergers and air rights, rather than the fact that it's affordable housing. The affordable housing bonuses rarely come up to even 5% of the FAR. Michelle, I know that from painful experience.
Does this apply to those buildings that they're recommending have shared kitchens and or bathrooms?
I don't think so, actually, because they wouldn't qualify as a quality housing project.
Exactly. So here they're proposing, it's such a contradiction. Here they're proposing building something that is definitely not quality housing. It's a step down from standards that we have in the 21st century. And then they introduce this to give bonuses to buildings that do add to quality. I mean, I don't.
No, they're not saying do this and do this. They're saying you are allowed to do this.
I understand, but
and it's okay for us to say that we hate the idea of the small and shared apartments, which I believe we just did.
Yeah, I'm just saying from a proposal, when you try to figure out the logic of all this, it's confusing to see what the overall general thinking was here. But you've answered my questions, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Judy.
Yeah, I have to disagree with Alita. We have a lot of walk-ups and 5-story buildings, and they don't have laundry rooms. And one of our local laundries on the street just went out of business. Now they're complaining they have to walk more blocks to get their laundries done. I think it's an important thing to have these facilities.
It does, in fact, I think, and this is as an architect, I think that the quality housing program does improve by giving this little tiny extra bit to developers. I think that the quality housing program does in fact improve the quality of the housing that's built in the city. I really do think that. You raised your hand again, Alita. Yes.
I did. I guess I have an overarching comment, and I'll just be really brief, which is that we don't demand enough of developers. By giving them more zoning for putting in a laundry room, that is the most basic kind of thing, for exactly the reason that Judy talked about, which is that people live in walk-ups, and if they're going to have to walk up 4 or 5 stories and not have a facility in their building, which I know that they were built 100 years ago, and they didn't have laundry rooms back then, but for anything else, it's just the most basic quality of life stuff. And every time they do something, anything, we say, here, build more, build bigger, get more money from it. And there just seems to be something so inherently wrong with expecting nothing from them. They make a ton of money.
Alita, you're absolutely
I'm
right.
done. But that's why another thing, I just oppose this whole thing. So I'm sorry.
No, don't, you don't have to apologize.
I do.
I don't, you're not wrong. No, you don't have to apologize, truly. Okay, Marco has one other comment, and then we're gonna vote on this.
Yeah, one more thing. The idea is you have to incentivize the developer. The developers, they are not right here to provide welfare to nobody. I know that they make a lot of money, and I, metaphorically speaking, always I said, it's like a pie. The pie, usually the developer, they eat it, everything. What I'm asking is the developers give some slides to the community. And I think this is the good program that they give something to the community in order to improve at different levels of housing. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you, Marco. All right, let's look at this one, and then we've just got 2 more to go. Now, the next one we discussed at some length and went over before, which is the landmark transferable development rights. And that's the expansion of the program to allow those development rights to be transferred at a greater distance. And Marco.
I think let's go call the question. You already described everything. Everybody was discussing about that.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, so what do we want to, so let's do this one. Okay, thank you, Kevin, for that. Next one, and one more. And finally, simplifying and streamlining permissions for development involving former railroad rights of way. This one is pretty arcane. Apparently, there are former railroad rights of way that could be developed and are not now because it's hard to get approval to do it. I think we don't have to talk about it. Do we want to make it easier for people to develop in former railroad rights of way? Housing. Oh, good. All right, Marco.
Honestly, I'm going to call the question because I don't have no arguments in that, unless Alida want to talk. I'm sorry for that.
Go ahead,
after
Alida.
Alida, we can call the question.
That we have no green space. I don't know if these things even exist in our community, but elsewhere around the city, the High Line is one of those beautiful parks. It's something that every city that has something like that tries to emulate. And we're just saying, throw up more housing without any kind of plan about where there's going to be corresponding green space or anything else. To just say this is not enough without considering other.
I think the principle behind this is to be able to create more developments like the High Line, in fact.
It's not what it sounds like if it's in a housing opportunity plan to get rid of a lot of zoning things. So I'm not so sure it would be about green space.
All right. Shall we? Thank you, Kevin. Wonderful. All right, we have mercifully, stop share. We have mercifully come to the end of our program this evening. And what we plan on doing with this information is in the minutes transmitting all of this to the board as a whole in order to help inform and well, I'm an optimist, inform and speed along our deliberations when we get to land use in June. So so anyway, that's what we're trying to do. Michelle.
Move to adjourn.
Marco seconds. Everyone seems to think it's a good idea.
Good idea. Thank you,
so
Anthony.
much, everyone. And
and-
we've all done a lot to.
Yeah, and it was no easy task for you and Elizabeth. So
Well,
thank you
you.
both very much. Appreciate all the effort. Thank you.
Thank you. It's important that we